I've got about 50 slides in 5 minutes, so we're going to jump right to the point. I could really reduce everything that I'm going to say today to one thing. We need to do a better job in North America educating the consumer about sustainability. We talk about a supply chain. There are two ends to the supply chain. I tend to think about the supply chain as if the consumer is pulling on that supply chain. But if the consumer is uneducated about what is coming through the supply chain, then he or she isn't in a position to demand from the market sustainable products. So let's talk about a couple of key points. And we're just going to jump through some of these very quickly. And let's see if I can get the next slide. Let's take a look at the overall market. If you look at the overall market in the U.S., although there are fluctuations year to year, these are relatively minor fluctuations. We can go back all the way to 1954, and we see that roughly 78% of Americans drank coffee the day before we asked the question. And although you see some fluctuations here, what's interesting about the market is when you compare coffee to other beverages, coffee is leading by far. But more importantly, that variation on a day-to-day basis really evens out when you ask the question differently. Did you have coffee last week? We go from 59% of the population to 71% of the population. And if we ask the population, did you have coffee last year? That number goes to 78% of the population. The amount of coffee being drank per person is also relatively consistent at 3.2. We have some people tell us they limit consumption of their coffee because they don't like it. 1% of coffee consumers put alcohol in their coffee, and they tell us that on a regular basis. Perhaps these are folks who are having coffee in the evening or can't decide if they should put milk or sugar in their coffee, so they just jump to alcohol. But where the numbers get really interesting is when you start to break the market down by age grouping. What we see is that overall, older consumers in America drink more coffee than younger consumers. But if you go a little bit more deeply into that picture, what we see is that where the value has come from in recent years is gourmet beverages, espresso-based beverages, single origin coffees, and premium coffees. And when you look at who's drinking those value-laden beverages, it's young people. Older people are drinking more traditional coffee. So when you think about the future of coffee in the US market, it's not just that young people are the future, but it's that they're driving the shift in value in the market. Now, this is critical because when we talk about attitudes, specifically sustainability, and we ask these questions every year, what we say to people is, why do you limit your consumption of coffee? And there's two big groups of answers. The first group of answers are health-related. I limit consumption of my coffee because of caffeine. I'm worried about GMO. But the second largest group of responses about why people limit their consumption are reasons limited to sustainability areas, the carbon footprint. I'm concerned about the packaging. I'm concerned about the impact on the environment overall. And so this is where it gets especially interesting. Overall, when you ask those questions, do you care about sustainability? About 17% of American coffee drinkers say they're concerned. But if you ask the younger coffee drinkers, those under the age of 39, nearly 50% of them say they're concerned about sustainability. When it comes to education, it's clear that although they're concerned about sustainability, they're not really educated about what's in the market. We ask about certifications. We say to consumers, have you purchased certified coffees? Are you aware that they're out there? Do you know what they mean? Within each of the certification programs, between 70 and 92% of consumers either haven't purchased, haven't heard of, or don't understand what they are. So from my perspective, this means we've got an education issue. So what do we do about it? Now, these are the people that founded the organization I work for. And we were founded in 1911. And we do all the types of things that these kinds of organizations do. We produce events, and we generate statistics. But we also do advocacy work. And we're also, especially recently, focused on the question of sustainability. Advocacy work really relates to sustainability. In the US, for example, the government is looking at questions related to caffeine. So we're speaking on behalf of the industry, letting the government know there's a real distinction between artificial caffeine and natural caffeine. We think there's no reason to regulate natural caffeine because we've been drinking it for 1,000 years. These are the types of advocacy projects that we take on. So it really only fits that we also take on the question of sustainability. So what are we going to do about this? Well, first of all, our board of directors, we met last year. We've been talking about sustainability off and on for years. But we decided to write a new strategic plan for the organization, and sustainability was one of the key objectives for the organization. But the first question really was, what does it mean for an organization like ours? We represent 350 companies. Big companies, little companies, medium-sized companies, trucking companies, packaging companies, shipping companies. What do you do with 350 different companies in the question of sustainability? Well, first of all, we do support some individual organizations. We've also been looking very closely at the individual programs that many of our members have. So when we looked at this question, we did what organizations like ours always do when faced with a question like this. We set up a task force. That's what you do. We put about 25 people in the task force, people from a wide variety of companies, a real cross-sector of the industry. And the question we put to the task force was, what should our mission be with respect to sustainability? So we looked at this, and the first question, and where we thought we wanted to take this initially, was we thought we wanted to look at standards. If we're representing 350 companies in the world's single largest consumer market, what an opportunity to set some baselines, to set some rules, to set some standards. But the more we talked about this, the more we realized this is simply impossible. It's not practical. So many companies are doing so many things, and we've heard about all this. For us to believe, very naively, that we could somehow set our own standards or set a benchmark, that really is just not possible. But what can we do? What we can do is exactly what the ICO is doing. We can do what's happening here, but in the US. We can bring people together. We can identify best practices. We can inventory what our members are doing. We can share that information, and we can put together toolkits. And we've just embarked upon that. We launched a new website just last week, the section on sustainability, and we're starting to identify and list each of the initiatives that each of our member companies are undertaking. And it's quite impressive. Dozens and dozens of companies doing something. This is a starting point for the organization. We're hosting an event in Texas in about 4 weeks, focused simply on sustainability. We're going to continue to look at this question and see what else we can do besides support organizations, be a convener, identify best practices, put a toolkit together, and of course, keep working towards an overall objective that I think we all share. The question for us isn't really what are we doing, but where can we go from here? What else we can do? And I know that where we're going to go from here is to lunch and the expo. So I think my 5 minutes are up. So I think I'll end on that note. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have later. And I appreciate having 5 minutes of your time today. Thank you very much.